My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 34 years old, and last Sunday my own mother organized a family dinner for the sole purpose of proving to everyone that I was a failure. She didn't say it like that in the invitation. Of course. The group message read, "Family dinner this Sunday, celebrating Ethan's exciting new expansion. Let's all support each other the way families should." I should have recognized the tone. My mother only used the phrase, "the way family should," when she was about to make an example out of someone. And this time, that someone was me. The dinner was held at her house. The same house I had quietly helped save 3 years ago when Ethan's first business collapsed and nearly dragged her mortgage down with it. No one at the table knew that part. Or maybe they did. And it was simply more convenient to forget. When I arrived, everything looked festive. Candles, roast chicken, wine poured before I even sat down. My brother Ethan stood at the head of the table like a young CEO about to ring the opening bell at the stock exchange. He smiled too confidently for someone who had called me 3 weeks ago begging for $200,000. I had said no, and that no was apparently unforgivable. Halfway through dinner, my mother gently tapped her glass with a spoon. That was when I knew. "I just want to say how proud I am of Ethan," she began warmly. "Starting a second company after setbacks takes courage." Polite nods circled the table. Then she shifted her gaze toward me. "Of course," she continued, voice tightening just slightly. "Success also depends on having the right people around you. People who believe in you." The air changed. I kept my posture relaxed. Ethan sighed dramatically. "It's been hard finding investors who truly understand the vision. Some people close to me think I'm too risky." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. An aunt across the table frowned in my direction. "Families should support each other." There it was. My mother placed her napkin down carefully. When one child builds something meaningful and the other refuses to help, you start to see who's driven and who's simply comfortable staying small. Small. Failure without using the word. A few cousins avoided eye contact. One uncle nodded as if this were a TED Talk on ambition. I felt the weight of their judgment settle over me, but not the way my mother expected. Not hot, not humiliating. Cold. Strategic, because I knew something she didn't. Ethan leaned forward, playing his final card. "I just needed a bridge loan. That's all. But I guess not everyone believes in family loyalty." That was the narrative. I was selfish. I was jealous. I was afraid of his success. My mother delivered the final line like a judge announcing a verdict. "When you refuse to lift your own brother up," she said, staring directly at me, "you can't complain when life leaves you behind." Silence. Every face turned to me. They expected tears, defensiveness, anger. Instead, I picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down gently. "I'm really glad we're having this conversation openly," I said calmly. "It's better when everything is out in the open." My mother's smile flickered. She had expected resistance, not composure. What she didn't know was that I hadn't refused Ethan impulsively. I hadn't said no out of pride. I had said no because I had seen the documents, because I had followed the transfers, because I knew exactly whose signature appeared on the guarantees tied to his new loans. And it wasn't mine. I looked around the table one last time. "I hope," I added softly, "that next week, we're all still as comfortable discussing responsibility as we are discussing ambition." Confusion rippled across a few faces. Ethan frowned. My mother's fingers tightened around her fork. The dinner resumed awkwardly, conversation shifting to safer topics. Vacation plans, weather, anything but money. But the performance was over. She thought she had staged my humiliation. What she had really done was set the clock ticking. Because 1 week from that dinner, the same family that watched me be labeled a failure would be reading a very different set of documents. And this time, the signature at the bottom wouldn't belong to me. If this had been the first time Ethan asked me for money, maybe the dinner would have hurt more. But it wasn't. 3 years ago, when I was 31, Ethan called me at 2 in the morning. His voice was shaking. The confident entrepreneur persona completely gone. "I just need a short-term transfer," he had said. "Investors are wiring funds next week. I'm just tight." Tight turned out to mean he was 6 weeks behind on payroll. I transferred $120,000 within 48 hours. Not because I believed in his spreadsheets, not because I was dazzled by his pitch deck, but because my mother had cried on the phone and said, "If his company collapses, the bank will come after the house." He used it as temporary collateral. He didn't tell me how serious it was. That was the first time I realized Ethan's ambition ran on other people's risk. I paid vendors directly, quietly negotiated down penalties, even refinanced part of my own investment portfolio to stabilize the mess, when the company eventually folded anyway. Ethan publicly described it as a valuable learning experience. No one described it as my financial hemorrhage, and I didn't correct them, because family comes first. That was my mother's favorite sentence. Over the next 2 years, I watched a pattern form. Ethan never failed because of bad planning. He failed because someone else didn't believe enough. Investors were short-sighted. Partners were impatient. The market was unfair. And every time he needed oxygen, my mother looked at me. "You're stable," she would say gently. "You have savings. He has potential." Potential. As if potential paid invoices. When he approached me about his second startup 6 weeks ago, I didn't react emotionally. I asked for numbers. He seemed offended. "You don't trust me?" "I trust data," I replied. He sent over financial projections, revenue models, a list of confirmed early partners. On the surface, everything looked polished, but something felt rehearsed. So instead of transferring money, I did something radical in our family. I hired an independent forensic accountant. Her name was Sandra Whitmore, 62 years old, former federal auditor, the kind of woman who could smell manipulation through a spreadsheet. I forwarded Ethan's documents without commentary. 3 days later, she called me. "Did your brother prepare these alone?" she asked. "I assume so." A pause. "There are inconsistencies in the loan disclosures. And Olivia, there are cross-collateral clauses tied to a family trust." My stomach tightened. "We don't have a family trust," I said. "You do now," she replied. That was the moment everything shifted. Ethan hadn't just built projections. He had secured private lending, and the guarantees listed under the loan documentation weren't blank. They were signed. Not by me. By my mother. Sandra continued explaining calmly, methodically. "Your mother co-signed as guarantor. Her retirement assets are listed. There's a lien provision tied to the house. And, this is important, your name appears in communication with lenders as a primary financial backer." I felt something colder than anger move through me. My reputation had been leveraged without my consent, which meant when Ethan told investors, "My sister's backing this," he wasn't bluffing socially. He was positioning me as silent collateral. That explained the dinner. That explained the performance. If lenders started asking questions, if payments stalled, the narrative had to be ready. Olivia, the unsupportive sister. Olivia, the jealous one. Olivia, who refused to help. Preemptive blame. I didn't confront my mother immediately. I needed to be certain. Sandra dug deeper over the next week. She found amended clauses, adjusted payment schedules, a personal guarantee my mother likely signed without fully understanding the liability structure. The most chilling part? The projected cash flow already showed strain. They would miss their first major payment within 30 days, which meant someone would be held responsible. And based on Sunday night's dinner, my mother had already chosen who that someone would be. When I refused Ethan's request for $200,000, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply said, "I'm not funding this." He had gone quiet for a long moment before replying. "Mom's going to be disappointed." He wasn't warning me. He was informing me. Now, sitting in my apartment after the disastrous dinner, I opened Sandra's latest email again. Attached were scanned copies of the signed guarantees. My mother's signature was steady, confident. She believed she was protecting her son. What she didn't realize was that she had stepped directly into legal exposure. And when the first payment defaulted, and it would, the lenders wouldn't be calling Ethan first. They would follow the paper trail, and that trail didn't end with me. It ended with her. By Monday morning, I stopped feeling embarrassed about the dinner. I started feeling impatient. Humiliation fades quickly when you realize it was strategically deployed. Sandra emailed me a full breakdown at 9:12 a.m. Subject line, exposure summary. No emotion, just numbers. Ethan's new company, Carter Growth Solutions, which I'm certain he named that way to borrow credibility from our last name, had secured 3 private loans totaling $480,000. The first loan was manageable. The second was aggressive. The third was reckless. Each one contained escalating interest penalties if revenue projections weren't met within 90 days. They wouldn't be met, not because I was bitter, because the client acquisition numbers were inflated. 2 confirmed partnerships listed in the proposal had no legally binding contracts attached. One of them, Sandra discovered, was only an email conversation expressing future interest. Future interest does not pay compound interest. But the most alarming section wasn't the business performance risk. It was the guarantee structure. Loan 1, Ethan personally liable. Loan 2, Ethan and Margaret Carter, my mother. Loan 3, Margaret Carter as primary guarantor, with retirement portfolio attached as secured asset. Primary, not secondary, not backup. Primary, I reread that word 5 times. Sandra called shortly after. Olivia, I need to be clear. If payments are missed, lenders will pursue your mother immediately. They don't care about internal family dynamics. Did she understand what she signed? I asked. Sandra hesitated. The language is legal but not deceptive. Anyone reviewing it carefully would understand the risk. That wasn't the same as saying my mother did understand it. My mother trusted Ethan the way some people trust religion, without asking for footnotes. There was more. Sandra forwarded communication logs obtained through public filing records in 2 separate email threads between Ethan and the lead lender. He referenced me directly. My sister has historically backed my ventures. She's reviewing an additional capital injection now. The family stands behind this expansion. That was how my name entered the structure. As reassurance, as implied security. I was the invisible insurance policy, and when I refused to transfer the $200,000, that illusion collapsed. Which meant the lenders would soon start asking uncomfortable questions. Which meant someone needed to be positioned as the reason for instability. Sunday night wasn't random cruelty. It was narrative management. If default occurred, the story would already exist. Olivia withdrew support. Olivia caused the collapse. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't angry at Ethan. Not in the explosive way people expect. I understood him. He had grown up being rescued. Every scraped knee treated like a broken bone. Every mistake reframed as brilliance misunderstood. But my mother, she had always prided herself on being financially cautious. She clipped coupons when we were kids, compared interest rates obsessively, lectured me at 16 about credit scores, and yet she signed as primary guarantor on a high-risk private loan with floating penalties. Because it was Ethan, because she believed that if she just supported him one more time, this would finally be the win. What she didn't see was that he wasn't building businesses. He was building bridges made of other people's safety nets. Tuesday afternoon, Sandra sent her final note. Projected default window, 10 to 14 days based on current cash flow. 10 to 14 days. 1 week after the dinner. The timing felt almost surgical. I considered confronting my mother. I imagined driving to her house, laying the documents on the table, asking one simple question. Why did you tell them I was a failure when you knew you signed the risk? But confrontation wouldn't change the contracts. And if I warned her too early, she would ask me to fix it. She would say, just cover this one payment. We'll restructure later. Later never comes in our family. Later always becomes another transfer, another sacrifice disguised as loyalty. Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the voicemail notification appeared. The transcription preview read, "Hello. This is Daniel Reeves from Hawthorne Private Capital. We're calling regarding Carter Growth Solutions and its guarantor obligations. We were told Ms. Olivia Carter is closely involved." I closed my eyes slowly. The paper trail had moved. They weren't calling Ethan. They weren't calling my mother first. They were calling the person whose name had been casually promised as stability. Me. The dinner suddenly made perfect sense. My mother wasn't mocking my failure. She was insulating herself from accountability. And the first crack in that insulation had just arrived, in the form of a polite, professional lender who believed I was still standing behind my brother. I pressed play on the voicemail again. This time, I listened to every word. I waited until the next morning to return the call. Not because I was afraid, because timing matters when the truth is about to rearrange people's lives. At 10:03 a.m., I dialed the number from the voicemail. "Daniel Reeves." A smooth voice answered. "This is Olivia Carter returning your call." A slight shift in tone, recognition, relief. "Ms. Carter, thank you for getting back to me. We were under the impression you were closely involved with Carter Growth Solutions. We're conducting routine verification ahead of an upcoming payment milestone." Upcoming, meaning overdue was close. "I'm not involved," I said evenly. I declined participation. Silence. Paper shuffling. "I see," he replied carefully. "That's inconsistent with prior representations made to us. I can't speak to what was represented," I said. "But I have not funded, guaranteed, or committed capital to this venture." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood. In that case, you should be aware that the primary guarantor on the third instrument is Margaret Carter." "I'm aware." His tone became more formal. "Payment is due in 6 days. If unmet, collection protocol initiates immediately against the guarantor. Not Ethan. Not the company. My mother." "I appreciate the clarification," I said calmly. "But I'm not financially responsible for this loan." "I understand," he replied. "We simply needed confirmation." We ended the call politely. No raised voices, no threats. Just documentation aligning with reality. For a long moment, I stared at my phone. 6 days. Sunday to Saturday. Exactly 1 week after she called me a failure. That afternoon, my mother texted in the family group chat, "Lovely dinner last weekend. So proud of how we all shared honestly." Shared honestly? The irony almost made me laugh. Ethan responded with a flexed bicep emoji. I said nothing, because while they were performing unity, the numbers were tightening around them. By Thursday, Sandra forwarded another update. Carter Growth Solutions had attempted to request a short extension on the upcoming payment. The lender declined. Risk profile elevated. No additional grace period. That evening, my mother called me. Her voice was lighter than usual. Artificial. "Olivia, sweetheart, I just wanted to check in. You seemed distant after dinner." "I'm fine," I said. A small sigh on the other end. "You know, when I said those things, I was just worried about family unity. Sometimes you can be so detached, as if objectivity were cruelty." "I'm not detached," I replied. "I just don't confuse support with liability." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted direction. "Ethan mentioned investors are being difficult. If you reconsidered, even partially, it would calm things down." There it was. Not apology. Not reflection. Containment. "Mom," I said gently, "did you read the guarantee documents before signing them?" The silence that followed was no longer strategic. It was real. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "I mean the clause listing you as primary guarantor on Loan 3. Breathing. Slightly uneven now. "Ethan said it was procedural," she replied. "Temporary. You were supposed to finalize your portion." My chest tightened, but not with anger. With clarity. "I never agreed to any portion." More silence. Then, defensiveness rising. He said you were reviewing it. I reviewed it, I said. And I declined. Her voice sharpened. So you're just going to let this collapse? That was the question. Not, did I sign something dangerous? Not, did he misrepresent you? But, will you rescue us? I'm not letting anything collapse, I said calmly. I'm simply not intervening. You're his sister, and you're the guarantor. The words landed harder than I intended. She inhaled sharply. You're being cold. No, I replied. I'm being consistent. The call ended shortly after. No resolution. Just tension hanging between truth and denial. Saturday morning arrived quietly. At 8:47 a.m., Sandra sent a single-line email. Payment not received. Default initiated. And just like that, the story my mother staged at dinner began to unravel. Not because I exposed her. Not because I argued. But because paper trails don't respond to speeches. By 10:15 a.m., the family group chat exploded. Ethan, there's been a misunderstanding with the lender. Mom, everyone stay calm. It's procedural. Aunt Linda, what's going on? I didn't type. I didn't need to. Because within hours, formal notice would arrive. And when it did, it wouldn't mention ambition. It wouldn't mention family unity. It would mention one thing only. Margaret Carter, primary guarantor. 1 week after she publicly called me a failure, her own signature was about to speak louder than any dinner speech ever could. The official notice arrived Monday morning. Not by email, not by phone, by courier. A thick, cream-colored envelope that required a signature upon delivery. My mother signed for it herself. I know this because at 10:32 a.m., my phone lit up with 15 missed calls and a string of fragmented text messages that made less and less sense the further I read. Call me immediately. This isn't what we agreed to. They're saying I'm personally liable. Olivia, answer your phone. I let it ring one more time before I picked up. Her voice was unrecognizable, breathless, stripped of the polished authority she used at dinner. They're threatening legal action, she said without greeting. They're saying I'm the primary guarantor, that they can attach my retirement accounts. The house. Olivia, the house. Yes, I said quietly. That's how guarantees work. A sharp inhale, almost a sob. But Ethan said, I know what he said. Silence fell between us, but this time it wasn't controlled. It was collapsing. They told me, she continued, voice shaking, that your name was mentioned in the original discussions, that you were backing this. I never was. I thought you would be, she whispered, and there it was. Not deception. Assumption. She had signed believing I would step in before consequences became real. She had never imagined I wouldn't. This is your brother, she said suddenly, desperation turning to accusation. If you had just helped when we asked, none of this would be happening. I closed my eyes for a moment. Mom. If I had transferred $200,000, the loan structure wouldn't disappear. The risk wouldn't vanish. It would just shift. To you, she snapped. Yes, another silence. This one heavier, because for the first time, she heard what she was actually asking. To replace her liability with mine. The family group chat kept buzzing in the background. Ethan had shifted tone. We're working on a solution. Lawyers are reviewing. Mom misunderstood the structure. Misunderstood. As if signatures happened accidentally. Did you read it? I asked gently. She didn't answer immediately. I skimmed, she admitted. Ethan explained the important parts. Did you ask an independent attorney to review it? No. Did you ask me before signing? Her breathing faltered. I didn't want you to say no again. The honesty of that statement cut deeper than any insult at dinner. She hadn't excluded me out of pride. She had excluded me to avoid accountability. You believed he needed you more than I did, I said quietly. That's not fair. It's accurate. She began to cry then. Real tears. Not theatrical frustration. I was just trying to help him succeed. I know. I thought you'd understand. I do understand, I replied. But understanding doesn't equal absorbing the consequences. There was a long pause. Then, softer than before. What happens now? It was the first practical question she had asked. Now, I said, you speak to an attorney who represents you, not Ethan. You separate your finances from his company completely, and you stop blaming me for a contract you signed. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She just breathed. I never meant to make you look like a failure, she said after a moment. I just needed someone to be the reason this wasn't working. And there it was. The dinner, the speech, the humiliation. It wasn't about ambition. It was about fear. If I was the selfish daughter, then she wasn't the reckless guarantor. But paper doesn't care about narratives. By late afternoon, extended family members began calling me directly. Not accusatory, careful, curious. Is it true Aunt Margaret signed everything herself? Were you actually involved? The tone had shifted. The same people who watched silently while I was labeled small now wanted clarification. I kept my answers simple. I declined to fund the business. I didn't sign anything. No embellishment. No revenge. Just facts. By evening, the group chat had gone quiet. Ethan stopped posting updates. My mother stopped defending him. Because once legal language enters the conversation, drama evaporates. Reality takes over. And reality was this. 1 week ago, I was the failure who refused to help. Today, I was the only one not legally exposed. Not because I was cruel. Not because I didn't love my family. But because I finally refused to carry responsibility for decisions that weren't mine. And for the first time in our family's history, the person who signed the paper would have to face what was written on it. By Wednesday. The silence was louder than the dinner had ever been. No more inspirational quotes from Ethan. No more speeches about loyalty from my mother. No more subtle digs about ambition. Just quiet. And quiet, in our family, meant the truth had settled in. I found out through Aunt Linda, who has always thrived on being the first to clarify things, that my mother had met with a lawyer Tuesday afternoon. Not Ethan's lawyer, her own. That detail mattered, because for the first time, she wasn't standing beside him. She was standing slightly apart. The attorney said the exposure is real. Aunt Linda whispered over the phone, as if legal consequences could overhear her. Margaret didn't fully understand the compounding penalties. I know, I said. There was an awkward pause before she added, You were right to refuse, Olivia. 3 words. Simple, heavy, strange how they hadn't surfaced during dinner. Later that evening, my cousin Rachel sent me a private message. I'm sorry about last Sunday. I didn't know the full story. Neither did I. At the time, I almost replied. But instead, I typed, It's okay. Things are clearer now. Because they were. Clarity doesn't feel triumphant. It feels still. Meanwhile, Ethan had stopped answering calls from extended family. His social media, once filled with motivational posts about resilience and vision, went silent. Silence is different when it belongs to someone who thrives on applause. By Friday, word had spread beyond the family. My mother volunteers at a local community finance board. Ironic, considering the circumstances. She had built a quiet reputation as someone cautious, disciplined, practical. Now, neighbors were asking gentle but pointed questions. I heard Ethan's business is restructuring. Is everything all right with the house? Reputation doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. My mother called me again that night. But this time her voice wasn't frantic. It was subdued. The lawyer says I can negotiate a settlement if I liquidate part of my retirement portfolio. She said, It won't take the house, but it will set me back. Set her back. The phrase felt small compared to what she had risked. I'm sorry, she added unexpectedly. I didn't answer immediately, not because I wanted her to suffer in the silence, but because I needed to hear whether this apology was for the contract or for the dinner. For what? I asked gently. For putting you in that position, for saying what I said. There it was. Not dramatic, not grand, but real. You didn't embarrass me, I replied. You exposed a dynamic that was already there. She exhaled slowly. I thought protecting him meant pushing you. It always has, I said. She didn't argue, because we both knew it was true. Ethan, meanwhile, had finally resurfaced, with a message sent only to me. I didn't think you'd actually let this happen. I read it twice. Then I responded. I didn't make it happen. He didn't reply. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. For years, I had been positioned as the safety net, the stable one, the fallback plan. When I removed myself, the structure didn't collapse because I betrayed them. It collapsed because it was never stable to begin with. Saturday evening, I attended a small family birthday gathering, previously scheduled. Impossible to avoid without fueling more drama. The atmosphere was different. No one mentioned ambition. No one mentioned loyalty. When I entered the room, conversations didn't stop out of judgment. They paused out of recalibration. Uncle Mark even pulled out a chair for me. Good to see you, Olivia, he said carefully. No undertone, just acknowledgement. Across the room, my mother sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in certainty. Not diminished, just human. For the first time, no one was performing. No one was assigning blame. Reality had done that already. And as I sat there, sipping iced tea, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from proving my generosity. Free from underwriting someone else's ambition. Free from being cast as either hero or villain in a story built on denial. They had called me a failure for refusing to fund my brother's risk. Now, a week later, the only failure anyone could see was a contract signed without understanding its weight. And the only person untouched by it was me. I met my mother the following Tuesday at a quiet cafe halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground, no dining table, no audience, no performance. She arrived early. I could tell by the way her coffee had already gone untouched for several minutes. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain when she saw me. Not defensive, not proud, just uncertain. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I wanted to, I replied. And that was true. Because closure doesn't happen through silence. It happens through clarity. She folded her hands together, a habit she had whenever she was bracing herself. I've been thinking about Sunday night, she began. About what I said. I waited. I told everyone you were small, that you lacked ambition. She swallowed. But the truth is, I was afraid. Of what? I asked. That if you weren't involved, then Ethan's business wasn't stable. And if it wasn't stable, then I had signed something reckless. There it was again. Not cruelty, fear. You needed me to be the reason, I said quietly. Yes. She didn't hesitate this time. Yes, I did. The honesty in that admission changed something between us. For years, she continued. You've been the capable one, the steady one. I always thought you didn't need protection. And Ethan did. I finished. He always seemed one step away from breaking, she whispered. I thought if I just supported him enough, he'd finally stand on his own. I leaned back slightly. You didn't protect him, I said gently. You postponed his consequences. She flinched, not from the tone, but from the truth. I see that now. Outside the cafe window, traffic moved in steady rhythm. Ordinary life. No drama, no speeches, just movement. The lawyer says I'll have to liquidate about 40% of my retirement portfolio. She continued. It will hurt, but I'll recover. I nodded. And Ethan? I asked. She hesitated. He's angry. Says I should have pushed you harder. Of course he did. And what do you think? She looked at me directly. I think I pushed the wrong person. Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. I'm not going to fund him, I said calmly. Not now. Not later. Not indirectly. I know, she replied, and I'm not going to step in if he makes another decision like this. A small nod. I understand. This was the difference. A week ago, understanding meant expecting rescue. Now it meant accepting limits. "I love you," she said quietly, "even when I get it wrong." "I love you too," I answered. "But love doesn't mean financial immunity." A faint, tired smile crossed her face. "No," she admitted. "It doesn't." We sat there for another half hour, not discussing money, not discussing Ethan, just ordinary things. The weather, a book she'd started reading, my upcoming work project. For the first time in a long time, we spoke as two adults, not as rescuer and resource. When we stood to leave, she reached for my hand briefly. "I won't ever put you in that position again," she said. "I won't allow myself to be in it again," I replied. That was the real shift. Boundaries don't require permission, they require enforcement. As I walked back to my car, I replayed the past week in my mind. 7 days. From being labeled a failure at a crowded dinner table, to watching the only signature that mattered determine accountability. I hadn't exposed her publicly. I hadn't argued. I hadn't defended myself in front of the family. I simply refused to absorb responsibility that wasn't mine. And when the numbers surfaced, when the contracts activated, when the legal language replaced emotional speeches, the truth didn't need my voice. It needed her signature. They called me a failure for refusing to pay for someone else's mistakes. 1 week later, the only mistake anyone could measure was written in ink, and it wasn't mine.